Well, it is good that you are with us here today, and I know for some of you this may be your first time here, or perhaps you have been away for a few weeks and you're just kind of rejoining us. We'll get you up to speed real quick. We have been working through the Christmas story, and we have been focusing upon some of the various dilemmas that those would have faced that very first Christmas. Christmas story is sometimes a challenging story to kind of speak through, because for many people it's familiar. And I think one of the challenges when things become too familiar is we just rush through it really quickly. We're aware of kind of what happens, we're aware of the situations, and we kind of jump to the end, and we fail to recognize, I think, some of the intricacies, some of the subtleties, some of the realities of what was taking place. And so the focus of this series, which is going to lead us to the climax of Christmas Eve, is let's just pause for a moment and look at some of the challenges, some of the dilemmas that those on the first Christmas would have faced, and then take that second step and say, okay, is this applicable to my life? Because one of the commitments we want to make as a church, if you're new to this church, is listen, we want this to be applicable. We want us to be able to step away every week, and regardless of where you are in life, regardless of where you are in faith, or regardless of whether you believe or you do not, the hope is that there's going to be a next step. The next step of saying, okay, if I want more of God in my life, what can I begin to do today? And this morning we're going to turn to the character of Joseph. And Joseph, and we're going to look at the dilemma that he faced. The dilemma of what I think would have been doubt. Now, doubt is one of those words that sometimes we don't talk a lot about at church. We may kind of hush a little bit because we sometimes may think, wrongly I believe, that faith and doubt don't work together. That if we have faith, that if we believe in Jesus and we want to be a part of our life, then doubt shouldn't be present. And then if doubt starts to step into our lives, we may begin to start feeling guilty or perhaps we have let God down. But what you start to see over and over, not only in the Bible, but in the reality of life lived faithfully, is that doubt is often not only present in faith, but what I'm going to suggest this morning is almost necessary to help grow our faith. And so if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, which was just read, we're going to jump back into the story of Matthew, or of Joseph, which is found in Matthew. You can swipe there on your phone or on your tablet, or you can jump in old school and pull out a Bible. But Joseph's story, we don't want to rush through too quickly, because there was a couple of indications, a couple of times where I think it would have been natural to have had doubt, to have had uncertainty. Because Joseph, in many ways, would have been like many of us. Many of us go through life with a plan. For some of us, we're more detailed and we have more specific plans. But for the most part, we don't just kind of go through life and say, okay, well, whatever happens, happens, and I'll just roll with the punches. We kind of have a plan. And for Joseph, his most immediate plan was to start a family. His plan was to get married, settle down, have kids, and start that type of a life. That was the plan, and then one day, the plan was dramatically interrupted. He found out that the woman he was pledged to be married to, Mary, was pregnant. And the child wasn't his. I have no idea what that conversation must have went like, but likely it was Mary telling Joseph after she had been visited by the angel and told God's plan for her life, and she agreed and got on board. But now she had the delicate conversation, not knowing how Joseph was going to react, of having to tell him and perhaps hopefully bring him on board. And so clearly this conversation has already happened, because Joseph now just suddenly had his life thrown upside down. And you have to think that for a moment there would have been questions. There would have been doubts. I mean, we're told early on that Joseph was a righteous man. Now, we're going to come back to that word, because that's a word I really hope that we underline and we take away with us, because righteous can mean different things in different contexts. right? For some of you a few decades ago, you'd referred to something as being righteous as being really cool, right? That's not what we're talking about. Joseph probably was a cool guy, but that's not the right context of righteous. Righteousness in the Bible spoke to your relationship with God. That someone who was righteous was someone who not only had a relationship with God, but honored God with their life and lived out their faith in practical ways. And so what we see right off the hop is that Joseph was in a relationship with God. And so when suddenly he found out that the woman that he was supposed to marry, start a family, settle down with, and do good things with God, suddenly got blown up. And you have to think for a moment that Joseph might have had a few conversations with God, had a few doubts, perhaps wondered, what the heck is going on? God, I've honored you. I've lived a good life. I'm righteous before you. And then this happens? I don't think it's pushing it too far to think there might have been some doubt. Well, the story doesn't end there. Because Joseph, even after having had this conversation with Mary, realizes that his plans have been rearranged. And so what does he do? He's clearly more of a type A personality, right? Because when one plan blows up, type A people say, that's okay, that plan didn't work out. I have another plan. I have another plan. And Joseph's plan was just to move on with his life. He was going to end the relationship with Mary because clearly he couldn't stay married to her. He couldn't marry her. He was going to go about his regular life. And again, we're told just how righteous he was. Because he could have publicly embarrassed and humiliated Mary. He could have gone public. And that would have been devastating for her. She either would have been shunned by her community, probably kicked out by her family, and worst case, according to their custom, because it would have been interpreted as adultery, she could have been stoned to death. And now Joseph, being a righteous guy, was like, whoa. I don't want her as my wife, but I'm not going to publicly humiliate her. I'm not going to bring that upon her. And so he was going to privately end the relationship. And that would have meant two people having a conversation with them and essentially saying, I'm done and I'm out. I'm going to get on with the rest of my life. And then it gets interesting. After Joseph had this plan, one plan blew up, he has another plan, and now God sends an angel and visits him and says, actually, hey, Joseph, your plan, not a good plan. Not a good plan. Go back to plan A. Plan A is better than plan B. Take her as your wife. Now, for us, we read the next verse, and Joseph got up and just did. I'm not so sure. Could there have been doubts? Could there have been questions? Could there have been the thought of, really? Really? This is the idea? I was ready to step away. Not only, God, have you rearranged my plans, but this is a big ask. This is a really, really big ask. Is this what you want me to do? You see, I think it's so important that we don't just simply read the Bible, but that we start to let the Bible read us. And what I mean by that is to begin to see ourselves in the story. To see ourselves in the reality that oftentimes, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, life doesn't always go according to plan. That we have plans, we have ideas, we have directions, and then suddenly, sometimes because of choices we make, sometimes because of choices other people make, and sometimes we don't even know what happened, but life doesn't go according to plan. And so the question is then, what do we do? Like, do we really live in the bubble of thinking that if I commit to God, if I'm a person of faith, then I should never have problems in my life? That I should never have difficulties in my life? I'm pretty sure that when Jesus says, come and follow me, he doesn't say, listen. The fine print also says no more problems, no more difficulties, no more hardships, no more heartbreaks, no more financial challenges. You'll never lose a job. You'll never face struggles at home. You'll never have... No. There is none of that small print, right? Jesus says, come and follow me. Come and trust in me. And we will walk through life together. That's the invitation that Jesus gives to us. And not only will he walk through it with us, but he will strengthen us with a sense of peace that will enable us to work through the challenges and the difficulties that we face in life. Those moments in life where doubt becomes prevalent and real. And so maybe the question isn't whether doubt is a reality, but rather how do we deal with doubts in our minds, particularly when it comes to relationship with God. Because what I've found in my life, whether it's my relationship with God or my relationship with others, that I view all of my relationships through a filter. That in many ways there are two different paths that our relationships can take with other people and with God. And I think that to be as simple as possible, the one path is the path of trust. That's a filter, which will lead in different end game. And then the other path is the path of suspicion. Right? So, we're going to practice here this morning. I want you, because I'm sure everyone in this room knows someone or has someone, is maybe sitting next to someone that you trust. Okay, so just think for a moment, someone you trust. Could be a spouse, a parent, a colleague, child, someone you trust, okay? Make sure you're tracking. You with me? Yeah? A few heads nodding? All right, okay, good. So you got someone you trust. Here's a scenario that you set up a brunch date with that person at Stillwaters at 12:30 this afternoon, okay? Promise to get you out of here by 12:30 at least, okay? So you're going to Stillwaters. I've never been there for brunch, but I hear it's amazing. You might want to try it next week because they're probably fully booked for Christmas this week, okay? Anyways, don't get distracted. You're going to Stillwaters at 12:30, person you trust. You walk through the door at 12:30, and the server, the hostess brings you to your table, and you notice that the person you're to meet is not there yet. Wow, no biggie. You're just going to sit down. You're going to wait for them. Well, a few minutes come by, and the person still hasn't shown up. And so now your server shows up and says, are you expecting someone? You're like, yes, I'm waiting for someone. Would you like something to drink? No, I'm going to wait. I'm okay. I'm going to wait until my friend comes. Okay, filter of trust. 15 minutes rolls by. Server comes by again. You're like, no, I'm still okay. 20 minutes goes by, and now you're starting to think, something's happened. Something has happened to this person. Maybe they're running late. Maybe they have car trouble. Maybe something else has come up. And you give them what? The benefit of the doubt. Why? Because you trust them. Finally, after 30 minutes, they walk through the door, and instead of being annoyed, you're happy to see them, and they come to you and actually try to explain what happened, and you're like, no, that's okay, it doesn't matter, I'm so glad you're here, I trust you, I knew something came up, I had to wait for a little bit, no big deal, let's enjoy lunch together, right? Filter of trust. A situation changed, but because of your trust and your relationship with that person, you were able to get past the speed bump, and you were able to enjoy the afternoon together, and the relationship grew. All right? Filter of trust, we're good? All right, now we're going to backpedal. This might be harder for some of you, might be easier for some of you. Think of someone now that you do not trust. Don't say it out loud. Don't say it out loud. This is being recorded, okay? Think in your own mind someone you don't trust. Got it? Okay. Same scenario. You're going for brunch at Stillwaters at 12:30. You walk through the door, the hostess sits you down at your table, and you notice they're not there. First response is, of course they're late. Can't believe they're making me wait yet again. 5 minutes goes by. Server shows up. Says, oh, are you waiting for someone? Yes. Would you like something to drink? Might as well. 15 minutes go by. Now the foot is starting to pat. You're starting to get annoyed. And suddenly the thought goes through your mind, I bet you they're doing this on purpose. I bet yet again they're late. Nothing important has shown up. They're letting me down yet again. 20 minutes goes by. You get up from the table and you leave the restaurant. 25 minutes later, the person shows up. And you're not there. Because you filtered the actions, not through a place of trust, but through suspicion. You didn't actually even wait around long enough for the person to explain what had happened. And do you see what took place? Not only was that afternoon wrecked and ruined, it's going to impact your relationship moving forward. It's going to be yet another dent in the relationship. All of us function with filters. Either it's a filter of trust or it's a filter of suspicion. My question for you this morning, which filter do you use with God? Which filter do you use? Do you use a filter of trust or the filter of suspicion? Because those two filters kick in not when things are going well, not when everything goes according to plan, but when life gets rearranged and situations don't go according to plan. That's when our filters kick in with God. Do you know Joseph had a filter? And it's that one word, righteousness. Righteousness tells us that he had a relationship with God, that he lived in a way that would be honoring to God. And so that when things didn't go according to plan, when things didn't go as he would have wished, when asks were being made that he maybe even didn't want to do, he was willing to go down the path of trust. Because we know that Joseph then awoke from the dream. He then brought Mary home as his wife, and he named the child Jesus. He did everything that God asked of him. You see, we can skip through this story far too quickly. And we can jump to the end of, okay, who's the next character? One of the shepherds showing up. One of the wise men showing up. I want to just pause at Joseph and begin to see how this can start to take root in our life as well. Because when we live faith with a filter of suspicion, it will not only impact God using us, but it's going to draw us further and further and further away from him. And too often in life and in faith, we exit the restaurant with God before we even allow him to show up and show us what he's going to do. Why is it so important for us to develop this filter of trust with God? Let me ask you, if Joseph said, you know what, God, this is a bad idea. I don't want any more of your plans. My wife is now pregnant, it's not my child, and you want me to marry her? No. I'm out. Do you honestly think God's plans would have been thwarted? Do you honestly think that God's plan to redeem the world through this child wouldn't have happened? Of course not. What would have happened is Joseph would have missed out on what God was going to do in him and through him. I'm not saying that trusting God is always easy. But what I always do is take a step back and recognize that when I fail to trust and when I base my life on suspicion, God's plan is not going to stop working in this world. What is going to stop working is my relationship with him and the fact that God wants to use me to make a difference in the world in which we live. I am struck over and over again by oftentimes it's in these moments of challenge when life is being rearranged, that our filters kick in. And I have seen people go down the path of suspicion and walk away from God. And I've seen people lean into their doubt and into their difficulties and trust God and to see incredible things. I've been in a conversation with a woman in our church here the past couple of weeks, and she's going through some difficult, dark places in her life. And this past week, I received an email from her where she described that as difficult and as hard to understand as this moment is in life, that she is trusting God and that she is learning more and more about him and that she is looking forward to the day that she's able to use this time, this season of life to make an impact in others' lives. That doesn't happen if you go down the path with the filter of suspicion, but begin to land in a place of trust. Maybe doubts have kept you away from God. Maybe you're someone here this morning that you failed to start this relationship with God because you've been afraid of the doubts and the uncertainties. Doubts are a part of life. We have a choice to make. And so as we wrap up this morning, just want to share 3 things that have been helpful for me to help me clean and make sure I filter my relationship with God through trust. The first one is simply acknowledge doubts. Simply recognize that doubt is a part of life. Doubt is a part of faith. And the key is not whether or not we have doubts, but rather how we respond to them. The second one is what I refer to as little R&R, right? Reflect and remember. One of the key words in the Bible that is often used when God is speaking to his people, particularly in a time of transition or a time of rearrangement, is remember, remember, remember. And what God is saying is, remember what I have done in your past. You see, so often the tendency is when problems arise and doubts begin, we lock in on them and we forget to remember what God is doing. One of the important reasons we read the Bible is that we can remember what God has done in the past. And we can remember what God is going to do in our lives and what he has done in the past as well. And so practice R&R, reflect and remember, reflect and remember. And recognize the faithfulness of God. And then the third thing is act. Act upon what God is leading you towards. You see, suspicion can oftentimes just make us wait and think, well, God, you're not going to show up, and so I'm done. But Joseph, even if he had doubts, even if he had uncertainties, he acted and he stepped out in faith and developed that filter of trust. And so I don't know where you're at in your life here this morning. Maybe for some of you, life has been rearranged. Maybe for some of you, God has made a big ask of you and you're thinking, I don't know, God, if I can do that. What filter will you use? Will you trust and lean towards? Or will you use the filter of suspicion and begin to back up? Because it'll impact your life. It'll increase your faith when you step towards. As a church, we have decisions. We have an opportunity this next coming year to make a decision about this building, about what we're going to do and how we're going to use it. And I don't know about you, but I have doubts. I have uncertainties. I'm not exactly sure all that's going to lay out and how God is going to work in it, but I do know this. God is not done in this town. God is not done in this church. God is not done working in and through us. And so I don't want to sit on the sidelines. I want to step out and to trust and to see what God is going to do. Or maybe we get even more personal. Maybe there's a situation, maybe there's a circumstance that you don't fully understand, or there's a decision that you need to make. Will you trust God in the midst of it? This past week, I reflected on some of the most significant decisions I have made in my life. Becoming a pastor, moving to Malawi on 2 different occasions, adopting children, coming to Paris, which I never knew existed before. The France one I did, not the Ontario one. And what I realized was in the midst of every one of those decisions, doubt was prevalent. And it's in the midst of doubt, it's like Jesus is extending his hand and saying, will you step through this with me? Will you trust me and come with me? Because I want to do something in you and through you. Don't let doubt stop what God is doing in your life. Don't let doubt stop what God wants to do through you in this community. So let's be like Joseph. Let's be righteous. Let's trust in him. And let's let our trust be seen in our actions today. Just before we sing this final song, I just want to pray with you. And so if there's